My name is Derek Collins, and I need to tell someone what really happened at Muir Lake before they transfer me out of this district. The official reports say it was a tragic accident. 5 campers drowned in what appeared to be a suicide pact. But I was there. I saw what pulled them into that water. And it wasn't despair or mental illness. It was hunger. I've been a park ranger in the Blue Ridge Mountains for 6 years, and Muir Lake has always been part of my patrol route. It's a beautiful spot, about 4 miles off the main hiking trail, perfectly circular, and so still that on calm days it looks like a sheet of black glass. The lake is deep. We've never found the bottom despite multiple attempts with sonar equipment. And the water is so clear you can see down maybe 30 feet before it just disappears into darkness. The locals have always avoided Muir Lake. When I first started working this area, the older rangers would make jokes about it, calling it the Hungry Lake or the Watcher's Pool. I thought it was just typical mountain folklore, the kind of stories that grow up around isolated places. Every remote location has its ghost stories, right? I should have listened to those stories. The incident happened 3 weeks ago on Tuesday night in late October. I was doing my evening patrol when I noticed light coming from the direction of Muir Lake, campfire light, flickering through the trees. This immediately put me on alert because camping isn't permitted within a quarter mile of the lake. The area is marked as environmentally sensitive, and we've had problems in the past with campers contaminating the water or disturbing the wildlife. I grabbed my flashlight and radio and headed down the trail toward the lake. It was a clear night, full moon, perfect visibility. As I got closer, I could hear voices, young people, laughing and talking. College kids from the sound of it. Probably students from one of the nearby universities on a camping trip. When I reached the edge of the clearing around the lake, I stopped to observe the situation before making contact. There were 5 of them, 3 guys and 2 girls, all looking to be in their early 20s. They'd set up a nice campsite about 50 feet from the water's edge, with 2 tents, a proper fire ring, and their food stored correctly. Despite camping in a restricted area, they seemed responsible enough. What struck me immediately was how quiet everything was around them. Normally, the forest at night is full of sounds. Owls, insects, small animals moving through the underbrush. But the area around their campsite was completely silent, except for their voices and the crackling of their fire. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. I was about to step into the clearing and introduce myself when one of the girls, a blonde in a University of Virginia sweatshirt, pointed toward the lake. "Look at that," she said. "The water's so still. It's like a perfect mirror." The others turned to look, and I followed their gaze. She was right. The lake's surface was absolutely motionless, reflecting the moon and stars with such clarity that it was hard to tell where the water ended and the sky began. It was beautiful, but something about it made me uneasy. "We should take some pictures," one of the guys said, pulling out his phone. "This is incredible." That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the reflection on the water's surface, I could see the group clearly, but there were 6 figures around the campfire, not 5. I counted again. 5 people sitting around the fire, 6 reflections in the water. The extra reflection was sitting between the blonde girl and one of the guys, but when I looked at the actual campsite, there was nothing there. Just empty space. But in the water's reflection, clear as day, was the figure of a woman, pale, with long dark hair, wearing what looked like a white dress. I blinked hard and looked again. The reflection was still there. As I watched, transfixed by this impossibility, the woman in the reflection turned her head toward me. Our eyes met across the water, and she smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted prey. That's when the girl in the UVA sweatshirt, her name was Sarah, I learned later, stood up and walked toward the water. "Sarah, where are you going?" one of her friends called out. "Just want to get a closer look," she replied, but her voice sounded strange, flat, like she was talking in her sleep. I started to move toward the campsite, intending to intervene, but something held me back. Call it instinct, call it cowardice, I don't know. But something told me that drawing my attention to myself right then would be a very bad idea. Sarah reached the edge of the lake and knelt down, staring into the water. From my position, I could see both her and her reflection, and they weren't quite synchronized. Sarah would move her head to the left, but her reflection would move to the right. Sarah would reach out her hand, but her reflection would pull back. It was like watching someone try to follow choreography they'd never learned.
"The water's warm," Sarah called back to her friends, though I could see from her posture that she hadn't actually touched it. "Really?" Another girl, Asian, wearing a hiking jacket, got up and joined her. "Let me feel." As soon as the second girl knelt by the water, the same thing happened. Her reflection became independent, moving in ways that didn't match her actual movements. And in the reflection, I could see that pale woman more clearly now. She was standing behind the reflected girls, her hands on their shoulders. "You guys need to see this," the first guy said, approaching the water with his phone held high. "I'm getting some amazing shots." But when I looked at his phone screen, tilted at just the right angle for me to see, it showed something different than what I was seeing with my naked eyes. On his phone, the lake looked normal, just water reflecting the moon and the surrounding trees. No pale woman, no synchronized reflections, just a typical mountain lake at night. The three remaining campers joined their friends at the water's edge, all of them kneeling on the narrow strip of sandy shore that surrounded the lake. They were talking excitedly about the beauty of the place, making plans to come back and bring other friends, discussing how perfect the water looked for swimming. But none of them had actually touched the water. I realized then that they weren't really talking to each other anymore. They were having 5 separate conversations, each responding to words that the others hadn't spoken. It was like listening to people talking in their sleep, carrying on conversations with dream versions of their companions. But in the reflection, they were all looking up at the pale woman, listening intently as she spoke to them in a voice I couldn't hear. That's when I understood what was happening. The woman in the water wasn't a reflection at all. She was something else, something that existed in the space between the real world and its reflection, and she was slowly pulling the campers into her domain. I should have acted then, should have called out, broken in a spell, done something to snap them out of whatever trance they were falling into. But I was paralyzed by the impossibility of what I was seeing, by the growing certainty that I was witnessing something far beyond my understanding or ability to stop. One by one, the campers began to undress. They did it casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Shoes and socks first, then shirts and pants, until all 5 of them were standing naked on the shore. But their movements were still slightly out of sync with their reflections, like actors following a script they couldn't quite remember. "The water's perfect," Sarah said, though I could see goosebumps covering her skin in the moonlight. "Just right for swimming," agreed the guy with the phone, though the October air was cold enough for me to shiver in my jacket. They stepped into the water together, moving slowly but purposefully. The lake was shallow near the shore, maybe 3 feet deep for the first 10 yards, and I watched as the water rose from their ankles to their knees to their waists. That's when I saw something that made me grab for my radio. As each camper moved deeper into the water, their reflection began to change. The pale woman was no longer standing behind them, she was merging with them, her features overlaying theirs like a double-exposed photograph. The reflected Sarah had the long dark hair instead of her blonde bob. The reflected guy with the phone had the pale skin instead of his natural tan. And as the reflections changed, so did their behavior. They moved deeper into the water with increasing confidence, as if they'd been swimming in this lake their entire lives. They began to dive beneath the surface, staying under for impossibly long periods of time, before emerging with expressions of pure bliss. I keyed my radio, hands shaking. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Collins. I have a situation at Mirror Lake. 5 individuals in the water, possible drowning in progress, requesting immediate backup and emergency medical." But when I tried to speak, no words came out. I could feel my mouth moving, could feel air passing through my vocal cords, but no sound emerged. It was like the area around the lake had become a zone of absolute silence that swallowed any attempt at communication. I tried again, pressing the radio's emergency beacon. The little light showed that it was transmitting, but I couldn't hear any response. Couldn't hear anything except the gentle lapping of water against the shore as the 5 campers swam further and further from safety. That's when I realized I wasn't alone on my side of the lake. There were others standing among the trees around the shoreline perimeter, figures in park ranger uniforms, watching the scene with the same paralyzed fascination that held me motionless. One of them was close enough for me to make out his face, and I recognized him immediately. Tom Hendricks, a ranger who'd worked this district about 10 years ago. Tom had been killed in a car accident on his way home from work, his vehicle sliding off a mountain road during an ice storm.
But there he was, standing maybe 50 yards to my left, wearing his old uniform and watching the swimmers with hollow, empty eyes. I looked around the shoreline again, studying the other figures more carefully. Johnson, who'd retired 8 years ago and died of a heart attack last winter. Martinez, who'd transferred to a different park and been killed in a rock-climbing accident 3 years back. Patterson, who simply disappeared one night while doing his patrol rounds, his body never found. All of them standing vigil around Mirror Lake. All of them watching as 5 young people swam deeper and deeper into water that should have been too cold for human survival. I tried to move, to run back up the trail and get help, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. It was like the lake was holding me there, forcing me to witness what was about to happen. The swimmers had reached the center of the lake now, where the water was deepest. They were floating in a circle, holding hands, their heads tilted back to look up at the stars. From my position on shore, they looked peaceful, serene, like they were performing some kind of water ritual. But in the reflection, I could see the truth. The pale woman was in the center of their circle, no longer trying to blend with their features. She was herself now, ancient, hungry, beautiful in a terrible way that hurt to look at directly. Her skin was white as bone, her hair black as the deepest part of the lake, and when she opened her mouth, I could see that it was full of something that might have been teeth or might have been the tips of grasping tentacles. She was feeding, not on their flesh, but on something deeper. Their warmth, their life force, their very essence. I watched as the color drained from their skin, as their movements became sluggish and mechanical. They were still conscious, still smiling, but they were being hollowed out from the inside. One by one, they began to sink. It happened gradually, almost gently. First Sarah, her blonde hair floating on the surface for a moment before disappearing beneath the black water. Then the guy with the phone, his device slipping from nerveless fingers to vanish into the depths. The others followed in turn, their hands still linked, their faces still turned upward toward the stars they could no longer see. The lake swallowed them without a splash, without a ripple. Within seconds, the surface was as smooth and still as glass once again, reflecting the moon and the surrounding forest as if nothing had ever disturbed it. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for them to surface, hoping against hope that they would emerge, gasping and laughing, that this had all been some elaborate prank or hallucination. But the lake remained still, and the ghostly rangers around its perimeter began to fade back into the forest, their vigil complete for another night. When I could finally move again, when whatever force had held me in place released its grip, I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, stumbled up the trail, fell and picked myself up, and kept running until I reached my truck. My radio worked fine once I was away from the lake. I called in the incident, reported 5 missing swimmers, coordinated the search and rescue operation that lasted 3 days. We found their campsite exactly as they'd left it. Tents still standing, food still stored, clothes still folded neatly beside their sleeping bags. But we never found the bodies. The dive team went down as far as they could, using specialized equipment and underwater cameras. They found old camping gear, pieces of metal that might have been car parts, and what looked like human bones scattered across the lake bottom. Lots of human bones, but none of them belonged to the 5 college students who disappeared that night. The official report blamed a combination of factors: hypothermia, possible alcohol consumption, peer pressure leading to poor decision-making. The families were told that the bodies had likely sunk to the deepest part of the lake and might never be recovered. Case closed. But I know what really happened. I know that Mirror Lake is hungry, that it's been feeding for decades, possibly centuries. I know that something lives in its depths, something that uses reflection and illusion to lure victims into the water. And I know that the rangers who've disappeared over the years aren't really gone. They're still there, standing eternal watch, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting campers to wander too close to the shore. The worst part is that I can feel it calling to me now. Ever since that night, I've been having dreams about the lake, dreams where I'm swimming in that perfect black water, where the pale woman is teaching me secrets about the space between reflection and reality. I wake up some mornings with my clothes damp and my shoes muddy, even though I haven't left my cabin. Last week, I found myself driving toward Mirror Lake without any memory of getting in my truck. I came to my senses just as I was turning on to the trail that leads to the water, and I managed to turn around, but it was a close thing. I could feel the pull of the place, the promise of answers to questions I didn't even know I had.
I've requested a transfer to a different district, somewhere far from these mountains, but I don't think it will matter. I think once the lake has noticed you, once you've seen what lives beneath its surface, there's no escaping its influence. Sometimes, when I look in mirrors or windows or any reflective surface, I can see her standing behind me, the pale woman from the lake, watching me with patient hunger. She's waiting for me to come back, waiting for me to join the eternal vigil around her feeding ground. And the terrible thing is, part of me wants to go back. Part of me wants to walk into that perfect black water and let it swallow me whole. Because I've seen what she offers: an end to questions,
an end to uncertainty, an end to the loneliness that comes with being the only one who knows the truth. But I'm fighting it. I'm telling this story because someone needs to know what's really out there, what's waiting in the deep places where the old rules don't apply. Someone needs to understand that some lakes aren't just bodies of water. They're doorways, feeding grounds, prisons for things that should have been forgotten long ago. If you're ever hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains, if you ever come across a perfectly circular lake that reflects the sky too clearly, that feels too quiet and too still, turn around, walk away. Don't trust what you see in the reflection. Don't listen to the voice that tells you the water looks perfect for swimming. Because Mirror Lake is always hungry, and it's very, very patient. My name is Derek Collins, and I've been a park ranger for 6 years. But I don't think I'm going to be a park ranger much longer. I don't think I'm going to be anything much longer. The pale woman is calling, and I'm running out of strength to resist. If they find this recording, if something happens to me, just remember, stay away from Mirror Lake. Some reflections show more than they should, and some hungers can never be satisfied. The water looks so perfect for swimming.